Hi, people. So it's the early hours of the morning, but I've had a lot of coffee in a very political mood tonight. For obvious reasons, we're seeing a prime ministerial transition from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss. Tomorrow is going to be unusual. It won't be like a normal transition on the grounds that Truss is going up to Scotland to Balmoral. I'm not sure what the timescale is, what sort of time she will be actually going to the Queen. And apparently London's scheduled to have heavy rain, so she might not even appear on the steps of Downing Street, which is the usual procedure. Earlier on the BBC report, actually with Sky News, it was quite torrential actually by London standards. So I think it's going to be a slightly unusual day tomorrow, later today. Um, Little piece of trivia: only one prime minister was sworn into office, appointed by a monarch outside the United Kingdom. That was Herbert Henry Asquith back in 1908. And what happened was the king at that time, Edward VII, was on holiday in France, and he knew that Sir Henry Campbell Bannerman was in poor health and there would be transition. So Asquith was actually appointed on French soil at the hotel that the king was staying in, which is a little piece of historic trivia. Um, I made a video earlier about trust, so I'm not going to say much more about that. I may add more later. She certainly has a lot on her plate. This video is about Boris Johnson, the man that she's succeeding. Now, Johnson's tenure has been relatively short. Historically, he is placed between James Callaghan and Henry Addington. 3 years and 44 days. He's outlasted Theresa May somewhat. He's outlasted Gordon Brown. But it's not an exceptionally long premiership. It sort of ranks in the slightly lower end of things. If you look at the 56 prime ministers we've had, it's on the slightly lower end of things, but certainly longer than George Canning or Viscount Godric, but on the lower end of things. But I think his stature in history and his name is much bigger than his tenure in office. I mean, I think Johnson will be remembered more, for example, than James Callaghan or Henry Addington for that matter. Addington, incidentally, was probably better known as Home Secretary and the brutal suppression of the events of the Chartist movement at the beginning of the 19th century, the Peterloo Massacre, and so on. Um, there's a lot to say about this man, so I'm going to try not to make this one too long because it is late, but I hopefully will get this uploaded before tomorrow. Where to start with Boris Johnson? Well, firstly, this is a good place to start. I got this sort of magazine book a few years ago by Nigel Cawthorne, Cripes. Um, I can't remember where I got this actually. I think it was in W.H. Smith's. But it's kind of a magazine book. It's very well written, entertaining, and I think really illustrates the man in quite a elaborate and colourful way. But I'm not going to pick out loads of references from this because there's a lot. But here's one. This is early on in the book in the booklet. Um, let's see. Boris's style is notable again in the spirited defense of privilege he wrote in December 1980. I tell you this: the civilized world must ignore these idiots who tell us that by their very existence public schools demolish all hopes most cherished for the comprehensive system. Clearly this is twaddle, utter bunkum, balderdash, tommyrot, piffle, and fiddlesticks of the most insidious kind. So strain every nerve, parents of Britain, to send your sons to this educational establishment. Forget that socialist gibberish about the destruction of the state system. Exercise your freedom of choice, because in this way you imbue your son with the most important thing, a sense of his own importance. That's pure Johnsonism. I also recall when he was questioned over a salary that he got for a Daily Telegraph column, he called it chicken feed. It was controversial at the time. Um, but when we look at Boris Johnson's long history of controversial statements and flippant remarks, the things that he's come out with. Now, some of them can be explained away as being out of context, or whatever. But I mean, really, there's the infamous one about the letterboxes referring to Muslim women in burqas. There's the um, bum boys in tank tops. That's a quotation. There is smiling pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, things like that. I can't think of any other senior politician in this country. Well, indeed, they wouldn't get to senior level with that history of controversy. Anyone else would be probably regarded as an extremist. And I think the Johnson brand was very effective for a long time. This sort of buffoonish image, this flippant clown, really. But behind that facade, I think, was actually a very shrewd political operator. I mean, I don't think anyone can question Boris Johnson's intelligence. That's where comparisons with Donald Trump really are flawed. Trump is ignorant. Trump is a thoroughly ignorant man. His business credentials are questionable. He's ruthless and assertive, but he's pretty ignorant about world history and about culture and so on. Boris Johnson isn't. This is the great irony of Boris Johnson. For all that he's a populist, he's actually a man of culture. I mean, he's a cosmopolitan figure. He, of course, became the big figurehead of Brexit, but he was a metropolitan Europhile, who debated classics with the historian Mary Beard. That was an interesting lecture, incidentally. Johnson defended the Greeks, she defended the Romans. Um, but Johnson's a political survivor, at least he has been up to this point. And, look at the roles he's occupied: Mayor of London, Foreign Secretary, and the highest of all in the land, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Um, there's so much to say about this man. He had a fairly successful mayoralty. Violent crime did reduce on his watch, and I think some of the schemes, like I think the bendy buses were successful. That's really best place for Londoners to decide. But violent crime did fall on his watch. It's on the rise again under Sadiq Khan. Um, and of course, the Olympics came to London on his watch. Um, so I think it's fair to say his mayoralty was quite successful. Um, Even before he got into politics, so he was something of a celebrity. I was looking at old newspapers, old now, from 2007, because I wanted to look up the passing of Boris Yeltsin. I've been thinking, of course, about Mikhail Gorbachev. I found that newspaper, but interestingly, the first paper that came to me, I collect newspapers, was a polemic by Polly Toynbee of The Guardian on Boris Johnson. So this guy's been around for years. That's why his fame and his legacy on this country probably far extends beyond his 3 years in office. Um, by contrast, Theresa May, James Callaghan, they weren't celebrities before they got to the highest office. May became high profile because she was Home Secretary, and Callaghan occupied the great offices of state. But they were just senior politicians, they weren't celebrities. Um, Johnson really was a celebrity. Um, so let's look at the most important thing of all, his premiership. I mean, his time as foreign secretary was relatively brief, just under 2 years, and it had very mixed success. I would say I don't think it was a disaster it was made out to be. Although certainly on the world stage, I remember the joint press conference of John Kerry. Kerry sort of joked, "It's a serious business, Boris," or something to that effect. Um, he said very unflattering things about Hillary Clinton and others. That flippancy can play to a domestic audience, but it isn't. It's not real politics when it comes to world statesmanship, and I think that has backfired on Boris Johnson. His lack of diplomacy. But let's look at his time as Premier because there's a lot to cover. It's been a very, very turbulent 3 years. Um, there has been the rise of these climate movements of Extinction Rebellion and so on in 2019. The Glasgow Climate Summit last year. Um, I personally think that the dystopian movement of some of the climate groups is dystopian worldview. They'll never be happy. I do think the UK has done more than some countries has, and that's happened under successive governments. Can we do more? Perhaps, but I think that you had people trying their level best at that. Business secretary, I forget his name now, but, but I think they tried their level best. I mean, we can really reduce our carbon emissions to net zero when you'd still have issues. You'd still have China, India, Australia, the United States. So I don't think it would offset much on the world scale, really. Um, COVID. Well, actually, Brexit. Let's talk about Brexit. Boris Johnson really did become Mr. Brexit. It's notable that when he stepped down, Theresa May was one of the few MPs not to applaud him, and that's understandable. I mean, having made him Foreign Secretary, he was one of many who basically stabbed her in the back. I personally think the Tories treated May very badly. She was doing a very, very difficult job. She was trying to do her level best, and the hardline Brexiteers, in their dogma and their puritanism, that they were sniping away and making her very difficult job even harder when she was trying her level best to deliver Brexit. Um, but it was said that it was never going to be a comfortable situation for a Remain voting MP to be in that position. That Boris Johnson was a converted Brexiteer, but of course he became the figurehead of this movement alongside Nigel Farage and Michael Gove. Um, but I think the legacy with Brexit really will take time. I don't think it's a complete disaster that some Remainers make it out to be, but nor has it been the wonderful thing that dogmatic Brexiteers make it out to be. Definitely there was dishonesty from the Brexiteer side, no question about that. The notorious billboard on the bus about the NHS saving money, things like that. I do think there was a lot of dishonesty in the campaign. They spoke about the Remain side being Project Fear, and anyway, I think those are old arguments now. At least I hope they are. Um, Otherwise, in Liz Truss, we're going to see the fourth Prime Minister going into the Brexit debate. But he delivered it. I mean, we left the European Union in January 2020. That's it. He did deliver that. So even if you're against Brexit, you have to concede that he delivered what he campaigned to do. By any measure, that's an achievement, at least a personal achievement. Now, in the long history of things, if we look at Brexit as being a disaster, then that might seriously damage Johnson's legacy. But I honestly think time will tell. If I didn't already mention it, by the way, they're assessing this on LBC tonight, and a lot of the commentary is scathing. But there is a group of Tory MPs who apparently are already plotting to have a vote of no confidence in Liz Truss because they want Boris to be back on the ticket. I think that would be I think if that happens, we're going to see Britain become kind of a laughingstock. And I think stability is very, very important. I think if Liz Truss is toppled and Johnson comes back, I mean, it has happened before. Harold Wilson came back, but I personally don't think it would be a good idea. Also, and I'll come to this soon, but Johnson left for a reason. His downfall was for a reason. Anyway, COVID. This was really, alongside the invasion of Ukraine, the major event on his watch, and it was an event that's unparalleled in modern times. At least 150,000 dead in this country. I mean, whether you look at COVID deaths from it being a direct cause or COVID on the death certificate, I think we can concede that it was an unprecedented event. Unprecedented. I don't. I mean, I remember those scenes when I went into the local shopping centre here in Sunderland, and it really felt like 28 days later. I mean, it was surreal. It was strange. Um, Boris Johnson, that great arbiter of freedom and liberty was the prime minister who had to call us into lockdown. Reluctantly, I think, at first, but he did eventually give in and we went into lockdown. Now, there's going to be debates over whether that was the right decision or not. I do think at the time it made total sense that this was a deadly pandemic. Um, the government had to take action, and a lot of that was common sense. Social distancing, wearing masks, and so on. Did it go too far? I think that people can look and debate about, for example, the effects on the economy, on mental health, suicides, domestic violence, all those sort of things. Um, but I think even Johnson's harshest critics would have to concede that we had a largely successful vaccine rollout. Um, and that comes down to Johnson's government and Health Secretary Sajid Javid at the time, and Matt Hancock. Um, I think that it's. I think Nadim Sahawi also had a role in that actually, but I think when it comes to COVID, you have to judge Johnson's record against other leaders. And I think we have one of the best vaccine rollouts. We also have one of the highest mortality rates. However, that shouldn't be judged on face value because countries like China definitely are not honest about the true death tolls. Um, and we must never forget, where this began. And it was spread by the lack of transparency from the Chinese Communist Party. Um, on China, I think that's one of Johnson's weaknesses. He has flip flopped. I don't think he's been consistently assertive. One day he's talking tough. Dominic Raab's foreign secretary was assertive. So has Liz Truss, incidentally. But Johnson, as prime minister, flip flopped. Look at Huawei. He flip flopped. Um, he really procrastinated on whether to give the green light to it or not. He should have been more assertive on that. Um, and whilst he took a hard line with Russia, I don't think he was sufficiently hard line with China. He would make these pleas of being a Sinophile as if he had to pander to Beijing. Um, One good thing about Liz Truss, and I think is, well, I think she's going to be more assertive. I don't think she's going to flip flop on these sort of important issues the way Johnson did. Um, Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the major events of his premiership, and I think he has been in the forefront of this. I mean, it is significant that President Zelensky has singled Johnson out for praise. He's had a street named after him in Kiev, and I mean, it's interesting yesterday when Truss made that statement that he's admired from Kiev to Carlisle, and there's sort of an awkward silence. But actually, people can mock that, but actually, it's not that far from reality. He is genuinely respected in Ukraine. As for Britain, well, the jury's going to be out, but there is definitely a cult around Boris Johnson in this country, and they do still admire him. This is very rare for an outgoing prime minister. Um, I think Boris Johnson has enjoyed a level of support, a sort of almost personality cult, and I spoke about this before, that is rare in this country. I can't think of it for any other politician. I mean, Thatcher was revered among conservatives, Blair to a lesser extent among centrists, but I can't think of any other prime minister that has a sort of personality cult the way Johnson has. I'm just saying that I've got storage issues here, so hopefully the video won't conk out. If it does, I'll make a second part. But yeah, his support for Ukraine is one of his most successful legacies. It was very assertive, it was very clear, and he didn't mess around, unlike Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron. Macron's talk to Putin might have been well intentioned, but I think they sent out the wrong message. You can't appease tyrants. Um, Boris Johnson's decisive victory in the 2019 general election may be more to do with the controversy around Jeremy Corbyn's worldview. I don't know how much of that came down to Johnson, although he did effectively get those red wall seats. I'm going to round this up soon because we have to talk about why he left office. Sleaze, corruption, and double standards. For all of Boris Johnson's achievements, I think the man was a gambler. I think he sort of took this idea that the British public would forgive him. Time after time after time, we saw scandal after scandal. Dominic Cummings, he dug down, he ignored his cabinet. Matt Hancock, same thing, well, to a lesser extent. Um, Pincher, Chris Pincher. But I think most damaging of all, Partygate. Now, Johnson supporters and both parliamentary and in the country will say it's trivial. It's just Remainers trying to smear him. But I think that they fail to see the optics. You know, rightly or wrongly, the COVID restrictions were the most draconian we've ever seen. People were given hefty fines. There were strict rules in place. When the Prime Minister and his aides violated that, it was a gross abuse of power, in my opinion. It was sheer corruption, sheer arrogance. We can look at Johnson's proroguing of Parliament. We can look at his lying to Parliament. I do think there has come with the Johnson era a real sense of entitlement. So far, Liz Truss has said nothing to convince me that she really gets it, that it's one rule for the Tories and another rule for everyone else. So if she really wants to maintain these red wall votes, I think she needs to understand that, okay, she's won this leadership race, she will be Prime Minister, but if she wants to win in 2024, I mean, so far, her pitch is to have corporation tax cuts. And yeah, it's pitching to the wrong people. But this is more of the same. And this is one of the problems, I think. Although Liz Truss is probably a more serious politician, although she too has come out with some strange and flippant statements, um, it does feel like Johnson Mark too in some ways, especially since she's so doggedly loyal to Boris Johnson. I don't think the Tories still fully grasp, apart from those who rebelled against him. I think there's a lot of Tories, and they make this big thing about their loyalty to the Prime Minister, but Boris Johnson has fallen from his own arrogance and his own sense of entitlement. The same with his party. Um, I think this is a very big perception problem with Tories. And unfortunately, for all of Johnson's achievement, for the vaccine rollout, for getting Brexit done, for his support for Ukraine, when you actually look at the association of his government with sleaze and corruption, it's really, really muddied up politics. And that's a very big problem. I think it's damaged trust. That's a big problem. How do I rank Johnson out of 10? It's very hard to say because his achievements are quite significant, especially for just 3 years in office. Yet, I think the double standards and the abuse of power. I haven't even spoken about Dmitry Lebedev, this Russian billionaire oligarch. That meeting that Johnson had with him after a NATO summit in Italy or a G7 summit, I think that could be a potential powder keg. It could be a can of worms. I think Johnson has questions to answer on that. So for all his support of Ukraine, it's to be admired. Perhaps a comparison to that actually is Tony Blair is widely hailed in Albania for his support for Kosovars. Um, yeah, I mean, what is Johnson's legacy? He always, he famously admires Churchill and he's written about Churchill. Churchill, he's not. But I do think he's made his place in history. I don't think he'll be a forgotten prime minister. I don't think he'll be sort of in the same vein as Theresa May or Gordon Brown or James Callaghan. Um, it might well be that Boris Johnson is the most significant shorter term prime minister of recent years. Another historical example of that is William Pitt the Elder, only in office for 2 years, but a much bigger figure than that time would suggest. I'm going to wrap this up. I don't think many people in mainland Europe will be grieving over the departure of Boris. Um, Liz Truss, her statement about the jury's out on whether this isn't verbatim, but her comments about Macron were less than diplomatic. I just hope she won't repeat Boris's mistakes. I think in terms of getting away from what Johnson done wrong, um, obviously the cost of living crisis, standing up to Russia and China, those things are very important. And I think she'll be good at some of those things actually, especially on national security. But what she really, really needs to avoid is this sense of arrogance and entitlement. Because I think there's this idea among many people that the Tories kind of see themselves as, well, we're the party of power and we're entitled to be that way. And there's this complacency, I think. Um, I mean, just because they defeated Jeremy Corbyn, Corbyn was a fringe figure. He was far left. I mean, fringe in the sense that it's pretty easy to beat someone like that in this country because the British people were never going to accept a far left prime minister. So actually, any Tory could have beaten Corbyn, I think. Um, Starmer is not someone to underestimate. He's been weak in some areas. I don't like this pandering to the woke left. But he's not Jeremy Corbyn. And I think Liz Truss would make a mistake to underestimate Keir Starmer. Sometimes he looks like a prime minister in waiting. On the other hand, he could be a Neil Kinnock. He could be sort of, and this could be a repeat of 1992, I mean 2024, where, the Tories are not popular, but they still manage to squeak in another victory. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. No doubt there will be more to say. No doubt I will look at this and think, oh, I've forgotten this. Um, One other big issue I should say on his watch is the issue of migration, the channel crossings, the tragedies at Grays in 2019 and in the channel in 2021, the Rwanda scheme. All of these things will also be um, noted in the Johnson era. The end of the war in Afghanistan and the chaotic withdrawal from there are other notable things. So he's had a very turbulent premiership. On the plus side, the vaccine rollout and the support for Ukraine. On the downside, the sleaze and the corruption and the entitlement. Brexit remains to be seen. Let me know your thoughts. What's Boris Johnson's legacy? I'll just say one final thing. The larger than life persona, the charisma, it does work in politics. But sometimes that sort of pitch oversays is welcome. And I think that's what happened with Boris. I think at some point that ran its course and people started getting tired of it and they started wanting to see a serious figure in politics again. We'll see what Liz Truss is like, if she's another Boris Johnson or if she's a more serious figure. Let me know your thoughts.